Welcome, everybody. So, yes, I'm going to talk about why I stopped sending surveys and started talking to customers. Just a quick summary of what I'm going to go over today. This is a method that I use to get customer input on feature priorities. And what I love about it, I call it a structured focus group. It's easy to implement quickly. It's easier to implement correctly compared with a survey. And in some cases, I find it to be more valid than a survey. And the reason that I'm talking about this today is that neither I nor my colleagues have seen something like this presented or published for this specific purpose of feature prioritization. It is possible that some of you are already doing this, which is great. But for those who haven't done it this way, I'm going to walk you through it step by step. But first, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background how this came about. I was consulting on a UI refresh of a mature product, and I had done some previous research for this team and found some dissatisfaction with the UI refresh and some usability problems with it. However, the team as a whole, there was some disagreement on what to do next about those issues. So I wanted to help solve that with data. So what this method accomplishes and what I needed to accomplish was understand from the customer's perspective which features are most important, understand why those features were important to customers, and that would help the team prioritize along with the other inputs that they use to make those decisions. So you might be wondering, why didn't you just send a survey? There's so many great things about a survey. You get a large sample size. You can analyze the results by different customer segments. It seems like it's fast to run a survey, and stakeholders, they do love them. So I have a lot of reasons that I did not want to send out a survey. I have tested out many surveys with many customers in the past using a Think Aloud protocol. And I can tell you that doing a proper survey, it's not fast. A critical part of my survey process is to test the survey in one-on-one interviews with several different participants who are in the intended audience. And the reason I do that is that if you don't do it, customers may not understand your survey questions. You may be asking the wrong questions entirely. In the worst case, this all means that the data you get back, it doesn't mean what you think it means, which is a huge risk. So I just want to say, if you've never tested a survey by watching someone take it live and then doing a retrospective interview with them about it, I strongly encourage you to do this. And I hope it scares you so much that you never send a survey out again without testing it first. What's my point? I didn't have time for all of that. They asked if I could do this in 3 days, and I bargained for like a week and a half to 2 weeks. So I was very limited in my time. I couldn't do a proper survey. Also, other problems with surveys, sometimes your features are actually too complex. They're too difficult to describe quickly in a survey, and we know people don't like to read. In addition, customers, if you send out a survey, they can't ask you clarifying questions if they are a little unsure, what do you mean by this, or they need some more details about the feature. So I needed something else. Having all those issues with surveys in my particular case, I ended up with something that took the best aspects of a focus group, but eliminated the groupthink, where of course the groupthink is the tendency that participants will be swayed by hearing other people's opinions. So I call this a structured focus group. Essentially what it is, you're going to have 4 to 6 customers in each group. Your key questions are predetermined and they're close-ended, which is why I call it structured. And the customers answer those key questions independently, so they don't influence each other, but you still get an opportunity for group discussion. Okay, so what do you need in order to set up for one of these? You have to set up your key questions in a survey tool. You're going to create materials that actually showcase the feature concepts, because you share that on screen with people. And then you set up a remote meeting tool. You can run these in person. I've always done them remotely because our customers are spread all over the country. So everything, this next section is about how to actually facilitate the group discussion. I start with a welcome. I go over, here's what we're going to do today. I have everybody introduce themselves, and I actually put questions on the screen of what I want them to cover. An example would be your job title or your role, or how long you've been using our software. Then I ask them to go ahead and open that survey that I've prepared, and I tell them we're going to use this throughout the session to collect some of your feedback. And then I actually have them go ahead and answer the very beginning of the survey, which is just a few demographic questions that I may want to look at later as I'm analyzing the results. So after the welcome, I do an overview of all of the features that we're going to talk about on the call. The reason I do this is to deal with what's called anchoring and ordering effects, which are the fancy terms for saying that the order that you show these features in can matter and can change how people respond to them. There's a great article about anchoring and ordering effects that I've got a little reference down the bottom if you want to check that out. So I show a full list of here's the features we're going to talk about, but I don't go over them in detail. I just give a real summary level. Here's what these features are. This gives people an idea of what we're going to talk about. It's what you're trying to avoid is that you show a couple of features and some of your customers mark them as your highest level of importance. And then when they see the third feature, they realize, oh, well, that one's more important than those other two. And they might have to sort of recalibrate. So you're trying to avoid that. The other thing I do to deal with anchoring and ordering effects is I try to vary the order that I present the features in across my different groups, because I do run multiple groups. The tools can make this kind of a pain, but it is a best practice. So I've just shown the overview of the features, right? And now I'm going to move into a discussion of each feature individually, and I show a slide for each feature. It's got a brief description of the feature on the page, a mock-up if possible. I think mock-ups are super helpful because they help convey the concept. You don't want different people envisioning different things in their minds. But I do make sure I tell them, usually these mock-ups are conceptual in nature and all the details have not been worked out. So I make sure that they know that, so that, you don't get feedback like, well, I would only use this if you have this certain field in this table, because we're not really at that stage yet when we're doing this kind of research. So, all right, so you show the slide. It's got a brief description of the feature. I read a detailed description of the feature verbatim. For me, it's important to read it verbatim so I don't mess it up and insert any of my own opinion and I want to be consistent across the different groups how I present these. So these are a few guidelines for how to write those detailed descriptions. I think they're the ones that you read out loud. They should still be concise. I say max 3 to 5 sentences. They should be neutral. So you're going to say what it does. And I think it's great to give an example of how it can be used, but you don't want to say, here's why it's great. Here's the impact of having this feature. That's for the customer to tell you. So you just try to keep it unbiased and just what it does. And then I iterate on these descriptions. If I find in the first group somebody asks a great question and I didn't cover that point in my description, I update my description so that for when I run the next group, it's a little more clear what the feature is. So here's a quick example of how not to write and how to write a detailed feature description. Obviously, it would actually be longer than this, but in the first one, this feature allows you to search by employee number. This helps you more quickly access an employee's profile. So that second sentence, you don't want that. It sounds like you're trying to lead them to like the feature. So leave that out, just tell them what it does. All right, so the key to this method is getting independent responses from customers before you have a discussion. So what I do at this point, I've gone over a feature, I've said, here's what it is. And then I ask, does anyone have any clarifying questions? And I'm really clear with them that I don't want you to state your opinion right now. I only want you to ask if you're unclear what the feature is or does. And I say, because I don't want you to influence how other people rate this item. And I say, we're going to talk about it in a minute. I want to hear your thoughts on why you rated it the way you did, but just, only ask clarifying questions right now. So, and then I have them go back to that survey and answer a question about this feature. And this is the question I use. You can use a different question if you don't like this one. I like this approach because it's simple and it's one question per feature. I ask, how important is this feature for you? And then, down the left, in the survey, you're going to list a short name of each feature. They're going to mark it's critical, it's important, it's nice to have, or I don't need it. I have found that customers, I've never gotten questions about what do these terms mean? Well, what do you mean by critical? And also I have customers who they'll mark some features under critical, some under important, some under nice to have. In other words, it seems to be working well from my standpoint, the times that I've used this. But again, if you have a different question you want to use as your key question, that's great. So, okay, so we do that key question for the first feature. And then we start talking about it. So I tell them, that survey was for your gut impression. I would, as we start discussing, I would really prefer that you not change your survey answer. And then I ask for someone to tell me, how did you mark this feature and what are the reasons? I actually call on people by name. This is for a couple of reasons. One is when you got a big group, and especially if it's online, it keeps people from talking over each other. People don't like to talk over each other. I think it makes it feel a bit more, I think it makes people feel more comfortable that they know when it's their turn to speak. And it also helps when you're doing analysis. And if you happen to have a note taker, they know who's speaking, they can put that in the notes because it's really important actually to know who said what. And when you're analyzing, when you go back to the recording, you want to make sure you know who's talking. So it just saves time. If you just call on people, you know who's speaking. So at this point, that's the sequence for one feature is, the independent, you describe it, the independent survey response, and then a group discussion about it. You do that same process for every feature that you want to discuss on this call. Optionally, you can also have people rank these features. After you've gone over all the features, you would do this and say, now that you've seen them all, please rank them. You have to set up your tool to allow them to do that. I'll be honest, I've stopped doing this. You can use ranking to break ties, but I use this method for, let's say on the small sample size. So I don't know that you really want to use ranking to break a tie. I would actually recommend that you just consider your other inputs that are outside of customer opinion, such as, well, which segment are we really trying to please with this next release? So you can do this. I think I'm kind of abandoning the ranking myself. All right, so you do that for all the features, and that's pretty much the end of how I run the call. I do run multiple groups to get a sufficient number of participants. So I typically, for a feature prioritization project, I will run 2 to 3 groups. It's always hard to give a guideline. How many participants do you need? But you do need enough that you can see trends. And my rough guideline, I'd say 12 to 15 participants total. Because again, you're trying to get directional feedback with this method. But you do want to be able to see trends. I have so far, when using this number has been sufficient for me to give solid recommendations on what's most important to our customers. So what's next? Okay, you've got all the data. You need to analyze it. Some researchers, especially those with an academic background, they will tell you that you need to decide your analysis method ahead of time so that you don't introduce bias in your analysis process. But we're all working in different contexts. So, and I don't personally work that way. I think you use your judgment in your context. Do you need to be that rigid or not? I am personally more of an exploratory researcher. I really like to get all the data, look at it in multiple ways to figure out what does it mean. And to be honest, when I look at it multiple ways with this kind of study, I usually get the same result no matter, or a very similar result, which is quite convenient. And you don't have to make any further decisions. And I would also just say, you'll see this when I talk in more depth on how I do the analysis, but I'm not just looking at numbers. I'm not just adding up, okay, which feature has the most critical votes. I'm also trying to look at patterns. So the first thing that I do is look at statistically, it would be called the mode. It just means where are the most votes. So in this example, I don't know if you can read the numbers, but the most of the votes or the most votes occur in the nice to have. So I think, well, that feature is probably just a nice to have. The next feature, it's more on the critical side. The most votes occur in critical. And then this final feature, not clear. It's kind of spread across all the categories. What does that mean? Why did that happen? Well, let me talk about that one. This is real data from one of my studies. Feature C. So I realized, oh, it's got, some people said critical and some people said they don't need it at all. Why? Feature C was a targeted search feature. Our enterprise customers who have really large data sets needed it because in their search results, they were getting lots of results back without this particular method of searching. Smaller customers didn't care as much because they didn't have as much data that they were dealing with. This is where this method, one place where this method shines. I got that from the discussion, listening to people talk about why they needed or didn't need that feature. And I honestly think if I had run a survey, it would have been harder to make that connection. Yeah, you could have made it. You could have done a segmentation by customer, done an analysis by customer segment, but it was so much easier just hearing people talk and saying, we have 3 John Smiths. I need a better search. So getting the why is one of the reasons that I really love this approach. And probably everyone here already knows why you want the why, but I'm just going to go over a few things that I've observed. One is what I just said. It's so easy to see trends. It was so obvious by just in hearing customers discuss these features that searching in this particular way was more important to the larger customers. Next point, seeing other ways to think about the solution. You really aren't going to get that from a survey so much. I'd be shocked if you did. One of the features we got feedback on was about customizing the information density on a page. So by default, there was a lot of white space and people were complaining about too much scrolling. You know, they wanted a more compact view. So in the customization feature, there was, it was like the ability to customize how dense your layout would be. When I brought back how popular it was that people wanted to customize and make the layout more dense, the team said, maybe we don't need to let them customize it. Maybe we just need to make it more dense for everyone. We wouldn't have gotten that from a survey. The final point is challenging internal assumptions. So before this research, again, I'm talking about, this is why I love getting the why. Before this research, the stakeholder had made an assumption about what customers wanted, which feature of these 3 they would want by looking at usage analytics. But, you know, looking at what people are currently using doesn't really tell you what else they want. That became more clear to them as I brought back the results from this, and I had those answers of why people wanted certain things. Okay, so how long does all of this take? I kind of already talked about this, mentioned this briefly. For a session, both of these numbers are for the same set of features. I ended up with a customer who couldn't make my group calls and I really wanted her feedback. It took me 20 minutes with her to go over the 7 features and get her feedback. On a group call, same 7 features. I ran 7 customers. It took 45 minutes. So basically, for a little more than twice the amount of time, you can get 7 times the amount of data if you do this on a group call. This is why I'm so excited about this. I do want to mention with the 7 features discussed, it does depend on the complexity of the features. These were fairly simple features that I was doing. So your mileage may vary. All right, how long from start to finish does this take? So for me, with this project, it was less than 2 weeks, which is about how much time I had. That's from start to finish, right? Is recruiting, running the groups, analyzing the data, presenting the findings. What I was able to fit in to that time frame was 3 sessions, a total of 13 participants, and we discussed 7 features. I did have a pool of participants ready, which made the recruiting easy. If you don't have that, it's going to take you longer. And conveniently, I did have people available to take notes, which makes the analysis slightly faster as well. Okay, how long would this have taken had I done one-on-one interviews, which is, typically my preferred method when I really want the why on things. I'm estimating it would have taken an extra 4 to 5 days because you've got to schedule 13 people, run 13 separate interviews, and then analyze all that data separately. Whereas with the group method, it's just easier to see those trends off the bat. Of course, if you need more participants than that, if you're looking at 20 or 30, it's going to take you even longer. So you save even more time as the number that you need increases, if that makes sense. I also find it's just easier as a facilitator to run 3 calls than to repeat the same thing 13 times and try to, be really attentive from participant number 1 through number 13. So to summarize, obviously there's more in the pros column because I really love this method. It's faster and it scales better than one-on-one interviews. It eliminates that groupthink that happens with traditional focus groups. You get to understand why people want or don't want certain features, easier to see trends, and also your stakeholders can listen into these calls. Is it more persuasive than a survey? I mean, that depends on your stakeholders, but I think it's very powerful hearing the actual customer discussion. The only cons I could think of is the sample size is still smaller than a survey. And you have to find meeting times that will work for most of those customers. So when should you use this method? My recommendation, if you've got a few competing features in mind, you have limited time to figure this out, and you're comfortable with getting directional feedback on the feature importance. Also, honestly, you have to be open to challenging your assumptions. This research did challenge my stakeholders' assumptions. I want to mention that there's a section you'll see in my materials called bonus material, and that was stuff that I thought might be of interest, but I knew that I didn't have time to cover it all in this 20 to 25 minutes. So you can check that out later if you have more, if you want to dig in further. So with that, I am gonna pause and take questions.
Wonderful presentation, Amanda. We have a few questions in the chat. If you'd like to go through them, or I can read it out to you.
If you could read it out, that would be fantastic.
All right. Tyler Johnson asked, what is your opinion about surveys delivered inside of a product, like part of a PLG strategy versus the other group settings?
Inside of a product. So at my current company, we have a survey inside of the product. To be honest with you, there are some, it's really convenient because our process to send out an email-based survey is quite painful actually and takes a long time. It's really convenient popping something up in the product. However, you are interrupting people, and the way that ours works is if they dismiss it, they can't get it back. They have to be in the mood right at that moment to answer your question. And one of our other researchers has actually asked customers about this. And some customers said that they actually prefer the email survey because it allows them to do it on their own time when they're ready. So I think there's definitely pros and cons. Like I said, though, I have used the end product, and it's a convenient way to get a quick pulse, but only if you get an appropriate response rate. I absolutely get a higher response rate through an email survey. Typically in my email surveys, I will get a 20 to 25% response rate, and in the end product pop-up, my last one I got 6%, and I was so uncomfortable that I said, this isn't even good data. We can't look at this. We have to repeat this as an email survey. Your mileage may vary, but that's my opinion. What else we got in terms of questions?
Awesome. Let me look at the chat here.
Sure, I'll check it out too.
Yuting Chu asked, how do you deal with pushback from those who say 4 to 6 people or qualitative focus groups are not statistically significant? And he also asked, what is the, one more second here. And what is the link to your bonus material?
Oh, so as soon as wherever the materials get uploaded for Product Camp, you can just flip past here. I'll show you. Bonus material is back here in this same presentation. So I talk about the various tools that I use. Anyway, that's where it is. It's in the same deck. So the first question was about pushback statistical significance. So to be clear, the reason I run these groups is that I want more than 6. I get 12 to 15. Which is, I know it's still a smaller number. I honestly, I haven't personally gotten pushback on you need statistical significance, which is just a testament to the type of organization that I'm in, that they understand both qualitative and quantitative. But I think what my answer would be is, honestly, let's say if I had someone bring me a survey and they said, well, we have this other data that's different from what your data says, I would pilot that survey in front of them and I would try to make sure, like, is this actually a valid survey? Because I have had times where a stakeholder said, yeah, but we have this other data, and I looked at it and it didn't look like it was a valid survey. So I know people love numbers, but if people didn't understand your questions, the numbers are meaningless. And so I would probably have that conversation with them about, okay, but like, have you watched anyone go through this? And do you know that these questions are being interpreted the way that you mean? And I would really just question, maybe it's totally valid, right? But you have to have that conversation.
All right. Carl asked, based on your experience, do you have a recommendation on an estimated maximum number of features to cover using this strategy?
Okay, so I said that I covered 7 features on those calls. Off the top of my head, I'm going to say somewhere like around 10, because after that, I feel like it's just a lot for people's heads. But I think you could probably get away with 10. I've done this before, where it was more like we were trying to determine MVP and what had to go in versus what didn't have to go in. And I feel like I probably had around 10. So that's my initial recommendation just off the top of my head. But yeah, so hopefully that helps.
Awesome. And Melanie asked, not sure what particular online tool she's referring to, but what's the online tool used? Do you have a
So
tool?
I have 2 different, let me show this bonus material real quick since we got a couple minutes. In terms of what the customers use to answer that survey question, sometimes I use a survey tool. Right now, what I have access to is called Alchemer, but there's others out there. I have also tried a card sorting tool, and the one I've tried is Optimal Sort. You will see in these materials I cover like pros and cons, how I do it in the 2 different tools and the pros and cons. If you're talking about the conferencing tool, there's a million different ones, right? But what I have access to currently is Zoom. I've tried WebEx, I've tried GoToMeeting. They all have little small differences that are, that make them better or worse depending on your situation. In fact, that's also one of my tips is back here in the back is conferencing tool considerations. I personally don't like when my customers can see how many observers are listening in on the call, and GoToMeeting would let me hide that, and Zoom doesn't let me hide that. So like, this is just a list of things that I personally care about that you could look at when you're thinking about, which conferencing tool do I want to use?
Awesome. One last question that I see here is from Becca asking, how related do features need to be to each other?
So I think the only thing that matters is that all of the features are something that your audience would use. In other words, so for an example, I run studies sometimes with benefits administrators. As long as all of the features are things that would be in the benefits portion of our product and that these are the right people who would use those, then I think it's fair game, because you're really saying like, hey, would you rather us improve the search, or would you rather us improve the display of the benefits page? But if I'm starting to ask them about some other area of the product that they don't necessarily use, then that becomes a problem. But otherwise, I think it's all fair game, because you really are internally as an organization, you may have a list of several features that are pretty unrelated, but you want to know what's most important to people if you can only tackle one of them.
Awesome. Great information. Thanks, Amanda. So a question to all attendees, if you want to ask a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask, or put your question in the chat. We have a few more minutes before the next session starts. And I also put some links in here in the chat to give some feedback by going to the survey link, as well as to WonderMe, to network with other participants along with the session presenters.
Cool. All right, I'll wait. And if there's nothing else, I could do a couple of these sort of bonus slides to just show you what's in here. Actually,
Sure,
I'll talk about this one real quick while we wait to see if there's more questions. So I talked about, you may want a different importance question or the key question. I have tried Kano in the past. I am aware of it. I know it is meant for this kind of thing. I don't like it. I've tried it, and one of my colleagues has tried it, and I've experienced several issues with it, including it doesn't seem to match how people think. I think that customers, they just want to tell you I want it or I don't want it, and here's how important it is to me. It seems like it feels weird to them when you're like, okay, but what if it wasn't there? Like, well, I just told you whether I wanted it or not, right? I find that the question, all those questions can confuse customers, especially the second one of if the feature is not present. Also, to my knowledge, the wording hasn't been validated. I certainly, when I pilot those questions, it doesn't feel like it's been validated to me because of the way people respond. Also, it's harder to analyze. So for me, I know Kano's out there, but I just love the simplicity of just asking them how important is it to them.
Awesome. No questions so far. Oh, wait, one more question came up here, I think. Kajal asked, how do you manage when two groups of people on the call have a difference of opinion on the importance of the feature?
Oh, we just take down a note, right? It's like, okay, person A, you think this was, so I go, okay, Julie, how did you mark this feature? I marked it critical. It's critical for me because X, Y, Z. And then I go, Joe, what about you? He goes, I don't need it. We don't have, we have a small data set. We don't need a search feature. We just take it down. Like, they don't need to agree. We're getting everyone's take.
Okay. No more questions so far. We got 3 minutes before the next session.
All right, well, let me show you all real quick how I use these two different tools. So the survey tool, this one is the one I end up normally using, where I just ask the importance question. You do, in a survey tool, have to ask, at least in my survey tool, you have to separately ask how they want to rank the different features. In Alchemar, it's a drag and drop process. In the card sort tool, in optimal sort, you set up all your categories as the levels of importance. And what's really cool is when they drag a feature into the bucket that they want, they can also change the order. And so I just tell them, look, as you put stuff into these buckets, put them in the order that you want them, so that the one at the top is your most important one, and the next one's the next most important to you. So that way I get the ranking, but it's basically seamless to also get the ranking. Again, I tend not to end up using the ranking, which is basically why I moved away from the card sort. But if you feel strongly about getting that ranking, it's pretty nifty to do the card sort. Also, the card sort is it's great if you've got a large set of features versus a few. So this was my summary on comparing those two tools.
Great. One last question came up here right now. It's from Yuting again. She asked, how do you prioritize features that work together? That is, which is more important in the car, the gas pedal or the brake pedal?
Yeah. So lucky for me, I'm not a product manager and I don't have to make the call. Honestly, I assist product management by gathering lots of data and representing the voice of the customer. I think product management is so hard because you have all these different inputs and things that you have to consider. I don't have an answer for that one. I make recommendations based on here's what the customers felt. And then the product manager has to take all the other inputs, including the business needs, and figure out what to do with it.